Hey guys, today we're going to take a look at some of the Gen 3 style paddle clones that are on the market right now. Now for this video, what do we mean by a Gen 3 style paddle? Well, for my personal definition, these are going to be Gen 2 thermoform paddles that are further enhanced by foam. So for the paddles in this list, they're going to have a second foam wall that goes around the top half of the paddle in what's called a diving board style. Now this is commonly known as a hyperfoam edge wall. Now Yola was the first to really popularize this with their Gen 3 paddles, so I brought out a Hyperion Gen 3S to use as a comparison against the other paddles on this list. For those of you unfamiliar with the Gen 3S, it's one of the most powerful legal paddles on the market right now. So it has a really hollow and stiff feel, and the ball shoots off the face really fast. It has a high pop, and the power is high as well, as you get a bit of a trampoline-like effect from that second foam layer, giving it a lot of firepower on drives. Alright, so the first paddle we're going to talk about is going to be the Planker from Paddleshop. So we've covered this a bit before in the past, but this is basically a Gen 3 Hyperion clone, though it's not a one-to-one match in terms of the dimensions. The throat taper is a bit sharper, so you get a bit more usable handle length, and the surface uses 12K carbon fiber instead. Now, in terms of how this plays, this was a little bit more powerful compared to the Gen 3S. It was a bit more stiffer feeling in comparison, and out of all the paddles I hit on the list, this is the most powerful one. But one thing to remember is that even though it says it's USAP approved, it's actually not, and it's also not UPA approved either. And as of right now, there are no plans to go for approval. But at the same time, I think this goes for around $60 after a discount code, which is a very good deal for something that you just want to mess around with for rec play. I think out of all the paddles, this might be the closest in feel to the Gen 3S, but very affordable, very cheap, very fun paddle to pick up if you just want to mess around. All right, the next paddle we're going to talk about is a bit of a funny one, but this is going to be the new ZZ Cannon from Luzz. And I believe at the time of this recording, there are rumors that this is going to be delisted soon. But anyways, let's talk about this one. So initial impressions, when I hit this against the Dinkmaster and bounced the ball off the face a few times, it sounded really loud and the feedback was very hollow. So it reminded me a lot of the Yola mod. Now, when I actually took this out to play, it had that hollow feel. It sounded like it had a really loud sound when I was playing. But I would say the power wasn't quite there. So people were telling me that it sounded like I was hitting the ball a lot harder than I actually was. So I still had like Gen 3 level power. Like it was high levels of power still in the same ballpark range as the Hyperion Gen 3 and the Planker that I also brought out. But compared to those two, it was noticeably just a tad bit underneath in terms of the power. So it has that feel of a Yola mod and it has that sound, but the power just isn't quite there. Um, though, like I just mentioned, it is getting delisted. Which is a shame because this would have been, I believe it goes for like $105 before a discount code, so I think drops down to 100 or under $100. So that would have been a crazy deal because it was a really cheap Yola mod clone for 100 bucks. That's also UPA certified, but even now for 100 bucks for something that's similar to a Yola mod and similar to like a Gen 3, it's one of the few paddles that like actually is able to be a successful kind of clone of the Gen 3 style paddles from Yola. It's not a one-to-one match, but it gets there, and for 100 bucks, even though it isn't approved, I still think it's a fun paddle. It's a different shape from the Planker and a different overall feedback, so even if it does get delisted, I still think it's kind of fun to pick up if you just want it for rec play. Alright, now the last paddle we're going to talk about is going to be the Middleweight Champ from Dynasty. So this is a 14mm Gen 3 clone that actually comes in the hybrid shape, which is a bit uncommon. Now they've been pretty upfront about their PB core numbers, as this does come in at 0.425. They did say that they did some slight construction changes, so it's meant to be a little bit more durable and controllable compared to the Gen 3s. Now, out of the paddles I hit on this list, so compared to the Hyperion Gen 3S, the Planker, and the Cannon, this hit the least hardest. So I would say even with all the weight added onto it, it was barely at the bottom of the power paddle category. That's not to say that this is a bad paddle. Like it still has that Gen 3 like feel, and it just doesn't hit quite as hard. So it's a bit more customizable and a bit more controllable. So it could still be a solid option. And I believe it actually still is USAP approved since the PB core number is valid. Um, but yeah, I would say this one feels the least similar to the other, or at least similar to a Gen 3 than the Planker and the Luzz are. But yeah, overall, like these paddles that I've covered, the Middleweight Champ, the Luzz, and the Planker, they're the paddles out there on the market that I think are the most successful Gen 3 clones out there. There are some other ones that have hit like the AMA NXT-01s or like the Red Robust. Like they have that same Gen 3 style technology, but they just don't quite get there. And just want to make this video on some of the ones that I found that were able to successfully like somewhat mimic the tech of the Gen 3s. Anyways, that's it for this week's video. A bit of a shorter one. I did do a lot of wide body testing as well, but I did want to spend more time doing it, so I'm going to spend the next week doing a bit more comprehensive wide body testing and comparison. So there'll be a bit more of a longer video next week, so stay tuned for that.